December 1943. A bitter wind swept across the American heartland as trains screeched into stations guarded by armed soldiers. Behind the rattling windows sat men who, only months earlier, had worn the Iron Cross upon their uniforms. German prisoners of war, defeated in North Africa, captured at sea or taken in skirmishes across Europe, were about to step into a world they could not have imagined. The United States of America. They shuffled out in columns, boots crunching against gravel, their eyes darting nervously at every detail. Back home, propaganda had painted America as chaotic, decadent, and weak. Yet what they saw here told a very different story. Streets were orderly. Civilians moved with calm assurance. Soldiers kept watch with discipline, but not with malice. And everywhere there was food, more than any of them had seen in years. The war had left Europe starving. Bread lines, ration stamps, and empty shelves defined daily life. But here in the United States, even in the midst of total war, markets overflowed with produce, meat, and milk. Children licked ice cream cones as though the world had never been touched by fire. Housewives carried baskets heavy with goods. To the prisoners, this abundance was more than bewildering. It was humiliating. How could a nation at war live with such ease? As buses carried them farther inland, the scenes only deepened the shock. Farmhouses stood tall and painted, not crumbling. Fields stretched endless and green, dotted with tractors, machines that worked tirelessly without a horse in sight. America was not starving. America was thriving. Some POWs whispered to one another, their voices low with awe. Others sat silent, staring out the windows, their sense of superiority unraveling mile by mile. Then came the camps themselves. They had expected barbed wire cages, mud, and cruelty. Instead, they found wooden barracks heated in winter, clean bunks, mess halls with steaming food, and even libraries stocked with books. Guards enforced order, yes, but not with fists, not with boots to the ribs, not with the brutality many had feared. The rules were clear, but the treatment was humane, that humanity stung as much as it comforted. For many of these men, indoctrinated to believe in the might of the Reich, the contrast was unsettling. The enemy, they had been told, was soft, unprepared, and divided was instead efficient, disciplined, and overflowing with resources. If this was the enemy's home front, untouched by bombing, overflowing with strength, then what hope did Germany truly have? And yet, the full weight of America's industrial power had only just begun to reveal itself. In the days ahead, these prisoners would be taken on work details, escorted through towns, and allowed to see the beating heart of America's war machine. What they witnessed would shake them to their core, because soon they would see sights that convinced them the Reich could never match such power. Berlin, 1943. Smoke still rose from shattered buildings as families clawed through rubble in search of what little remained. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to skeletons of brick and twisted steel, the result of relentless Allied bombing campaigns that turned once proud cities into smoldering ruins. This was the Germany the captured soldiers had left behind, a homeland locked in a desperate struggle, bleeding from 1,000 wounds. Food was scarce. Ration cards dictated survival, and even those could not guarantee a meal. Bread was stretched with sawdust and filler. Coffee was a memory, replaced by bitter roasted acorns. Meat was so rare that many children grew up never tasting it. Housewives queued for hours, clutching ration books in numb fingers, only to be told that supplies had run out. Hunger gnawed constantly, a quiet enemy no less deadly than the bombs that fell from the skies. In place of abundance, the German people were fed words. Posters on crumbling walls proclaimed resilience. Radio broadcasts thundered with promises of victory. And through it all, propaganda painted the enemy, particularly America, as decadent, divided, and soft. According to the Reich, the United States was a nation of chaos and weakness, a place where money and pleasure had eroded discipline. Germans were told that American cities were filled with crime, that its people were lazy and racially divided, incapable of true sacrifice. For soldiers at the front, these images shaped expectations. When captured, they imagined their fate would be to rot in misery under the watch of such an enemy. They expected vindictive treatment, hunger, and the same kind of shortages they had known at home. After all, if Germany, so proud, so disciplined, struggled to feed its own, how could a nation of supposed decadence do better in wartime? But the truth was harsher than the propaganda. Daily life in the Reich had become a contest of endurance. Women worked endless shifts in factories without respite. Children salvaged metal, dug trenches, and carried messages through streets scarred by war. Cities braced for the nightly terror of air raids, families huddling in basements as the sky burned red. And still, the ration lines never grew shorter. Each year, each month, life became thinner, more fragile, more uncertain. The German people adapted because they had no choice. Ersatz substitutes, fake coffee, fake butter, fake cloth, became part of daily existence. Shoes were made of pressed paper. Soup was made of turnips, stretched to feed a family of 5. Even soap was scarce. Survival became a science of improvisation, while faith in the Reich's promises filled the gaps hunger could not. This was the normal world in which captured soldiers had lived. A world of rubble, ration cards, and slogans painted across ruined walls. A world where scarcity was accepted as the cost of loyalty. So when these same soldiers stepped into America, into towns without bomb damage, into markets with overflowing shelves, into camps that offered more food than they had seen in years, the shock was not mild. It was seismic, because across the Atlantic, they would encounter a society that seemed untouched by war. June 1944. Midwest plains stretched endlessly under a summer sky, golden fields swaying in the wind as if mocking the soldiers who had known only mud and destruction. Here, amidst orderly rows of barracks and neatly kept lawns, German prisoners of war were arriving at American camps for the first time. The fences were high, topped with barbed wire and guarded by soldiers, yet inside the world was almost unimaginable. The first thing they noticed was food. Mess halls offered steaming portions of meat, potatoes, and vegetables, served on plates, not rationed in scraps. Bread was fresh, not sawdust stretched, and milk flowed freely. For soldiers who had endured the starvation and substitutions of the European front, every bite was a revelation. Some ate slowly, afraid it was a trick. Others devoured with desperate hunger, eyes wide, stomachs aching with disbelief. Meals were more than sustenance, they were a declaration. America had the means to feed not only its own, but its enemies as well. Medical care was another surprise. Illnesses that would have gone untreated in the chaos of war in Germany were addressed promptly. Doctors checked the prisoners regularly. Minor injuries were treated immediately, and outbreaks of disease were contained with precision. Sick men recovered faster than they could remember, their bodies cared for with a professionalism that seemed almost foreign. The German soldiers had been trained to endure pain, to accept suffering as routine. Here, it was met with compassion and efficiency, yet the camps offered more than food and medicine. Libraries, stocked with books in German, offered both instruction and escape. Prisoners could read novels, learn new trades, or study engineering and science. Sports fields invited competition, camaraderie, and relief from the monotony of confinement. Soccer matches, baseball games, even chess tournaments allowed the men to reclaim fragments of normal life. Work was also organized. Prisoners could earn small wages by laboring in kitchens, laundries, or farms, giving them both purpose and a sense of dignity. Compared to German military life, these camps felt surreal. Back home, soldiers had known relentless drills, punishment for minor infractions, and constant fear of bombing. Here, life was structured, yes, but humane. Orders were followed, discipline maintained, but there was no cruelty in the enforcement. POWs could sleep through the night, knowing they would not be tortured or neglected. The contrast was stark, almost impossible to reconcile with everything they had been taught about the American enemy. Some prisoners expressed gratitude in quiet, almost hesitant ways. Others felt unease, a gnawing sense of inferiority or confusion. How could a country at war be so organized, so generous, and still maintain the machinery of conflict? The answer was hidden in plain sight. American industrial and logistical power, paired with societal discipline, allowed abundance even in wartime. But at the time, these men only understood the immediate reality, a world that should not exist. And yet, the real shocks came when prisoners were marched beyond the barbed wire. Early morning, 1944. A convoy of military trucks rumbled down sunlit highways, carrying German prisoners of war into the vast reaches of the American heartland. Dust rose in the wake of the vehicles, settling on the shoulders and boots of men who had spent months, even years, on shattered roads in Europe. But here the roads were wide, smooth, and seemingly endless. They stretched through rolling farmland, past neatly painted houses, and into towns that looked more like postcards than battle zones. As the prisoners peered out from the trucks, they began to notice details that defied everything they had been told about America. Cars of every shape and color roared past, some sleek and low, others boxy and sturdy. Engines purred instead of coughed, tires rolled over asphalt instead of mud. Streetlights gleamed with polished neon, advertising everything from shoes to soda to radios. Windows showcased goods piled high, appliances, clothing, canned foods, all accessible, all abundant. The men whispered among themselves, their German voices carrying a mix of awe and disbelief. This was not a country at war. This was a nation in full bloom. Railroads ran alongside highways, each train loaded with raw materials, timber and crates destined for factories that churned day and night. Smokestacks released controlled puffs rather than choking clouds. Assembly lines moved with precision and purpose. To the POWs, who had seen European railways bombed, sabotaged, or clogged with refugees, these images were almost surreal. American efficiency was not propaganda, it was reality. Their destinations varied. Some were taken to sprawling farms, where tractors plowed fields that stretched beyond the horizon, replacing horses with machines that could work 10 times as fast. Others were sent to factories, where assembly lines produced goods essential for both civilian life and the war effort. Still others trudged into logging camps, where massive saws cut timber with surgical precision, workers moving with a rhythm that seemed choreographed. Everywhere they went, the signs of industrial might were undeniable, yet the most startling revelation came in the details of everyday life. Shop windows were not empty or rationed. They were vibrant displays of abundance. Clothing, shoes, toys, and household items were stacked high, waiting for customers who could pay in cash or credit. Cafes and diners served steaming coffee and baked goods. Children laughed in streets lined with bicycles. And advertisements promised more than just survival. They promised choice, comfort, and enjoyment. The prisoners could not stop comparing this to their own reality. Ration lines, shortages, and cities reduced to rubble. Every mile traveled seemed to underscore a single uncomfortable truth. Germany, with all its discipline and propaganda, could not hope to match this scale of production, organization, and abundance. And as the trucks carried them from one town to the next, the men began to realize that the war they had fought in Europe was only a fraction of the struggle, a war they were ill-prepared to understand in its totality. And then one day, they were taken to a place that changed everything, the American supermarket. Mid-afternoon, 1944. A small convoy of POW trucks slowed to a halt outside a building unlike any the prisoners had ever seen. From the outside, it appeared ordinary. Brick walls, glass doors, and a parking lot filled with cars gleaming under the sun. But the moment the prisoners stepped through the sliding doors, the world they thought they knew shattered completely. Inside, the supermarket stretched farther than their eyes could follow. Bright lights illuminated aisles, stacked from floor to ceiling, with goods they had only heard about in stories or seen in propaganda illustrations. Cans of fruit glistened in colors that made no sense in a world of ration substitutes. Loaves of bread were soft, wrapped and plentiful. Jars of peanut butter, boxes of cereal, and packages of cookies were lined up in neat rows, waiting for customers who could simply take what they wanted and pay. Fruits and vegetables appeared that should have been impossible. Oranges in winter, apples polished to a shine, grapes that looked plucked from summer vines. It was a riot of color and abundance, a stark contrast to the ersatz substitutes of war-torn Germany. POWs wandered the aisles, eyes wide, hands hovering over shelves, as if touching these items might make them vanish like a mirage. Some murmured to one another in disbelief, comparing what they saw to the bread stretched with sawdust, the bitter coffee substitutes, the empty shelves of their homeland. For many, the shock went deeper than mere amazement. This was a society at war, yet it could feed itself and its enemies with a generosity that seemed almost impossible. Each aisle became a lesson in industrial might, logistics, and organization. The refrigeration units hummed quietly, keeping perishable goods fresh. Stocking staff moved efficiently, replenishing shelves, as if the supermarket itself never tired. The scale of it was staggering. A single store could hold more food than an entire German town could hope to produce in a month. Some prisoners were silent, their pride and indoctrination colliding with the reality around them. Others laughed nervously, unsure if it was relief, disbelief, or shame. How could a nation at war live with such abundance while theirs crumbled under the weight of total conflict? The answer, they began to see, was not luck. It was planning, efficiency, and the sheer scale of American industry. Every can, every crate, every polished loaf of bread was part of a system capable of sustaining millions at home, while projecting power across oceans. This revelation was more than material. It was strategic. German soldiers had been taught that victory depended on discipline, courage, and tactical skill. But here, in this temple of plenty, they glimpsed a different kind of power. The ability to organize, to produce, and to distribute resources at scale, a power that Germany, exhausted and blockaded, could no longer match. Many realized in that moment that the war was not simply a matter of tactics on the battlefield. It was a war of production, logistics, and industrial might. Against this, the Reich was already falling behind, and yet even as they absorbed this truth, the prisoners sensed there was more to the story. The food was astounding, yes, but it was only a surface layer, a visible expression of something far greater. The machinery, the factories, the networks of transport and labor, these were the true engines of American power. And in the weeks to come, they would see that might on full display, in ways that made even the supermarket seem small, because food was only the beginning. America's true power lay in its machines. October 1944, dawn broke over a sprawling industrial complex in the Midwest. The air filled with the steady hum of machinery and the occasional hiss of steam. German prisoners of war, still adjusting to life in America, were marched along gravel paths toward buildings larger than entire European city blocks. Inside, the prisoners would witness a reality that made every ration line and bombed street of home feel painfully inadequate. The factories were alive in a way that defied imagination. Assembly lines stretched farther than the eye could see, each worker and machine moving in synchrony, a perfectly choreographed dance of production. Jeeps rolled off conveyor belts in minutes, not days. Trucks were assembled with modular precision, parts arriving just in time to meet the relentless pace of construction. Tanks, monstrous and gleaming, emerged from vast halls as if materializing from thin air. Pistons, gears, and rivets moved with a rhythm that made the prisoners' own war-torn experience feel primitive. Everywhere, the scale of operations stunned them. Machines operated around the clock, producing at rates that Germany could not dream of matching. Cranes swung massive steel frames with ease. Conveyor belts carried engines, wheels, and chassis with mechanical certainty. Workers coordinated with near-military precision, each aware of their role in a massive machine that stretched across the entire factory floor. It was efficiency incarnate, a living demonstration of what American industry could achieve under pressure. The POWs had been trained in military discipline, but this industrial discipline was different. It was not enforced with fear, but with design, logistics, and accountability. They saw foremen monitoring production, engineers calculating tolerances, and workers collaborating seamlessly. The sheer output, the speed and the orderliness of it all made the men question everything they had learned about the American softness and decadence. Here was a nation at war, yet thriving, capable of turning raw material into lethal machines faster than any European nation could respond. Some prisoners tried to calculate in their heads the enormity of what they were seeing. A single assembly line could produce more vehicles in a week than an entire German division could hope to field in months. The numbers were staggering, almost incomprehensible. Yet even as the men struggled to grasp the scale, the psychological impact was undeniable. They were witnesses to an industrial revolution harnessed for war, a force of creation as lethal as it was disciplined. Beyond the mechanics, there was a human story as well. Workers, men and women alike, moved with determination and precision, their faces calm, almost serene, in the midst of production chaos. The POWs could not help but notice the morale, the pride, and the sense of purpose that infused every corner of the factory. This was not desperation. This was mastery. Every completed vehicle was a testament to planning, skill, and a societal commitment that Germany, exhausted and beleaguered, could no longer emulate. The prisoners left the factories with their heads spinning, minds struggling to reconcile their indoctrinated beliefs with reality. They had expected a fragile enemy, a nation weakened by indulgence and distance. Instead, they had encountered a behemoth of productivity, a nation that could outproduce, out-organize, and outlast them in ways that no battlefield victory could overcome. And the numbers behind these machines told a story no propaganda could hide. Spring, 1945. From the vantage of a hill overlooking a massive American production yard, German prisoners of war could see the scale of output that defied comprehension. Smokestacks rose like sentinels, signaling the relentless churn of industry. Assembly lines hummed with mechanical precision, spitting out planes, tanks, trucks, and artillery in a rhythm that seemed inexhaustible. Every hour, machines delivered instruments of war that Europe's battlefields could scarcely contain. For the POWs, the contrast to Germany was staggering. Back home, bombed factories struggled to restart. Materials were scarce, and skilled workers were pulled into uniform, leaving gaps in production that could not be filled. Every tank that rolled off a German line required months to assemble. Every plane was a prize fought over for raw materials. Here in America, thousands of aircraft were completed in a single year, more than Germany could produce in the entire conflict. Ships glided down slipways into the water before crews could even christen them. Artillery pieces, each polished and deadly, moved from workshop to port in a seamless flow. Trucks and jeeps rolled off lines by the hour, ready to carry men and supplies to distant fronts. The POWs walked among this flood of steel, their boots echoing on concrete floors, eyes scanning the ceaseless rhythm. They had trained for efficiency, discipline, and precision in the German army, yet nothing could prepare them for the sheer scale of American output. Every machine was part of a larger organism, a system designed not only to produce but to sustain, capable of feeding, equipping, and transporting millions across oceans and continents. Conversations among the prisoners were hushed, tinged with disbelief and unease. "How can they do this?" one whispered. Another shook his head, the numbers already swimming in his mind. They tried to tally what they had seen: hundreds of tanks, thousands of trucks, entire squadrons of aircraft, produced, inspected, and shipped with methodical speed. Germany, even with all its pride and military discipline, could never hope to match this relentless output. Each machine was more than metal. It was a statement of power, organization, and industrial genius. And yet, it was not just the quantity that shocked them. It was the integration. Ports, railroads, warehouses, and supply depots worked in concert. Materials flowed seamlessly. Workers knew their roles, and the end result was an unstoppable tide of war materiel. In Europe, supply lines faltered. In America, they flowed like clockwork. The contrast was not subtle. It was a revelation, a demonstration that victory on the battlefield was inseparable from the ability to sustain an entire war effort. By now, the prisoners began to see the futility of the conflict they had fought. Years spent on fronts, enduring death, hunger, and exhaustion, seemed almost irrelevant in the face of a nation whose industrial capacity could simply replace everything lost, faster than Germany could destroy it. The ideological narratives that had kept them loyal, the tales of superiority, the assurances of eventual triumph were crumbling before their eyes. Letters home began to carry subtle truths, carefully phrased but impossible to hide. Words like abundance, machines without end, and efficiency crept into accounts of camp life. Every description, every observation chipped away at the carefully constructed illusions of Nazi propaganda. And with each letter home, the cracks in Nazi propaganda widened. Autumn. In 1945, in the quiet hours of the evening, German prisoners of war sat at wooden desks in their barracks, quills scratching against paper as they recorded thoughts they dared not speak aloud. The pages of diaries, letters, and memoirs would later reveal a private world of astonishment and doubt, an inner reckoning with a reality they had never imagined. Many wrote in hushed tones about the sheer scale of American abundance. "Milk flows like water," one soldier noted, "and bread is soft, white, and plentiful." Another marveled at the supermarkets, where fruits out of season filled the shelves, and canned goods stacked higher than a man could reach. In these entries, the prisoners confessed the quiet shock that had settled over them, that a nation at war could maintain such prosperity, such order, such civility. It was a luxury they had never known, and one that made their own homeland sacrifices and deprivation all the more stark. Beyond material abundance, diaries reflected on freedoms previously unconsidered. POWs observed civilians moving through towns with ease and dignity, workers speaking openly, children playing without fear of air raids or scarcity. In their writing, many contrasted this with the strict controls and constant surveillance they had lived under in Germany. The discipline they had once praised now appeared as rigidity, a cage that stifled creativity and ultimately human resilience. Some entries revealed the slow erosion of faith in Hitler and the ideology that had bound them. "I do not understand how we believed," one soldier wrote, "that we could defeat a nation that moves with such precision, yet smiles as it does," another confessed. "Each day here makes me question everything I was taught, our victories, our strength, our cause. We are small against this vast, organized force." For many, the dissonance was overwhelming. The image of the invincible Reich collided with the reality of American industry. Civility and abundance, and the cracks in propaganda became impossible to ignore. Letters sent home, though often censored, carried coded observations. POWs wrote of efficiency, of systems that function without brutality, of a society capable of sustaining war without succumbing to chaos. These documents, written in secret or in subtle euphemisms, became small rebellions of truth, proof that the enemy they had been trained to hate could be humane, prosperous, and unbroken. Even as they chronicled these observations, the prisoners were careful. They knew their words could be read, their loyalty questioned. And yet the act of writing became a form of psychological survival, a way to process the impossible reality around them. In the quiet corners of camp life, they wrestled with awe, shame, and a dawning understanding of something far greater than any battlefield victory. And as they watched America in motion, they realized this was more than industry. It was a different way of life. Winter, 1945, snow drifted across the grounds of the POW camps, blanketing the neatly kept barracks in a quiet serenity that felt impossible to men who had known the chaos of battle and the ruins of Europe. Yet even in the cold, the vibrancy of American life could not be muted. It was everywhere, in the orderly towns, the humming factories, the overflowing markets, and for the prisoners, it became a symbol of something far larger than mere material wealth. To the German soldiers, America's abundance spoke volumes. It was not just food, trucks, or airplanes that astonished them. It was what these tangible products represented: organization, ingenuity, and a society capable of sustaining itself without fear, coercion, or extreme authoritarian control. In the Reich, strength had been equated with obedience, punishment, and propaganda. Here, strength was productivity, resilience, and liberty working hand in hand. The contrast was undeniable. POWs observed communities where citizens moved with purpose, but also with choice, where labor and innovation were rewarded, and where the machinery of government and industry supported rather than suffocated the individual. They saw children playing in schoolyards, farmers tending fields without constant fear, and workers contributing to the war effort with a sense of pride rather than dread. Each observation chipped away at the notion that dictatorship was necessary for survival, that fear was the engine of progress. For many prisoners, the experience became almost philosophical. They began to see that the abundance surrounding them was not simply the product of material resources. It was the outcome of a society structured to allow initiative, creativity, and personal responsibility to flourish. American power was not imposed from above. It arose from thousands of small decisions, each coordinated yet flexible, forming a network of capability that the Reich, rigid and centralized, could never replicate. Letters and diaries became vessels for reflection. They live freely, yet they produce more than we could imagine, wrote one POW. Another noted, "Their streets, their homes, their machines, they all speak of order without oppression." In these words, the prisoners began to confront a truth that had been suppressed for years: democracy. When combined with organization and purpose, could rival and surpass even the most tightly controlled autocracies. Even the cultural markers of American modernity reinforced this revelation. The prisoners noticed the radio broadcasts that entertained and informed without fear of censorship, the cars and appliances that allowed convenience without coercion, the supermarkets stocked with choices that reflected both abundance and freedom. To the POWs, every visible element of daily life was a silent argument. Strength need not be brutal. Prosperity need not be coerced. Civilization could thrive even in wartime without sacrificing human dignity. And yet, the lessons extended beyond admiration. For the first time, these soldiers understood that the war they had fought was not only a clash of armies, but a confrontation of systems, of ideology, organization, and capacity for resilience. America's abundance, its streets, its factories, and its freedoms were living proof that the Reich's rigid hierarchy and propaganda could never generate this kind of sustainable power. The image of America as a superpower crystallized in the minds of the prisoners, not through conquest, but through creation. Every thriving town, every rolling assembly line, every stocked shelf was a monument to the capabilities of a society that valued both efficiency and liberty. It was a revelation that would linger long after the war ended, and when the Reich finally collapsed, these lessons returned home with them. Spring 1946. The war was over, yet the echoes of conflict still lingered across Europe. German cities lay in ruins, families struggled to rebuild, and the old structures of power had crumbled under the weight of defeat. Among the returning soldiers were those who had spent years as prisoners in America, men who had seen firsthand a society unlike anything they had imagined, and who carried memories that would shape their own nation's future. These former POWs returned with more than survival. They returned with understanding. They had witnessed abundance where others saw scarcity, order where others had known chaos, and civility where cruelty had been the norm. The supermarkets, with aisles overflowing with food, had revealed the possibility of sustenance without oppression. The factories, humming day and night, had shown the transformative power of organization, innovation, and collective effort. The highways, railroads, and towns had demonstrated how infrastructure, planning, and efficiency could elevate an entire society. For many, these experiences became a blueprint for post-war reconstruction. In letters, memoirs, and conversations, they spoke of a society that functioned not through fear, but through collaboration and foresight. In workshops and government offices across Germany, they advocated for systems that encouraged initiative, rewarded competence, and distributed resources efficiently. The lessons of America, of abundance paired with freedom, became quietly woven into the fabric of a new, democratic society. The psychological impact was profound. Soldiers who had once been trained to believe in the invincibility of authoritarian rule now understood that true strength was not imposed from above. It emerged from the capacity of a nation's people to act, to innovate, and to sustain one another. Where Hitler had promised triumph through control and obedience, America had demonstrated triumph through coordination, discipline, and opportunity. For many, the lesson was humbling yet inspiring. Prosperity and power need not come at the cost of humanity. Even years later, memories of POW camp life lingered vividly. They recalled walking along factory floors, watching jeeps and tanks roll off assembly lines with mechanical precision. They remembered the humming refrigeration units of the supermarket, the shelves stacked impossibly high with fruits, vegetables, and canned goods. They recalled quiet evenings writing in diaries, wrestling with awe and doubt, and the slow, irreversible realization that their homeland had fought a war it could not sustain. These recollections became more than nostalgia. They became catalysts for change. Post-war reconstruction in Germany borrowed quietly from the systems the prisoners had observed. Efficient supply chains, market-driven abundance, and a focus on civic responsibility. Even the simple notion of accessible food and consumer choice carried symbolic weight, a reminder that a society could thrive without fear and without tyranny. The American model of productivity and civility offered a vision for a nation emerging from devastation. And yet, the most enduring lesson was less tangible than infrastructure or industry. It was the realization that a nation's true power lay in its people, their ingenuity, and the systems that allowed them to work together in motion. The soldiers had fought against a seemingly unstoppable Reich, only to discover that the unstoppable force was not weapons or armies, but the dynamic strength of an entire society functioning as one. In the end, the Reich soldiers learned the most devastating truth of all. America's might wasn't just in its weapons, it was in the strength of an entire nation in motion.